Good evening, everybody. Glad you could join us for our third town hall meeting associated with the upcoming coastal steelhead season. Thank you for carving out some time this evening to be with us. Looking forward to a good conversation and hoping to have a lot of input from you all. Next slide, James. So before we dive in, just a heads up that this evening's session is being recorded and will be available on our website for viewing by close of business tomorrow. All attendees are going to be muted upon entry. If you have questions or comments for staff, you can type them into the Q&A function on your screen, and you can raise your hand. We're asking folks to raise your hand if you do have a question. If you're calling in, you can raise your hand by dialing *9 on your phone. If you're on a computer, you can find the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. And then sometimes, depending on which version of Zoom you have, you may first need to click reactions before you can see the hand function. So look for that. When it's time for comments and questions, we encourage you to speak up and provide your comments live. To speak, you'll need to unmute yourself by using the mute button on your device or by entering *6 if you're on a phone. You can also submit a question via the Q&A feature. We'll be answering those after the town hall, as we most likely won't have time tonight. And speaking of time tonight, we want to make sure that we are able to hear from everyone. We got some feedback after town hall number 2 that we should consider limiting folks, either time limit or number of questions. So what we're going to be doing tonight is asking you to limit your question or comment to one question or one comment per hand raise. That doesn't mean you can only ask one question or provide us with one comment, but we do want to make sure we hear from as many people. So if you have another question, we'll ask that you re-raise your hand, and you'll be back in the queue. As a reminder, I understand that there's a lot of passion around steelhead, wild steelhead especially. So we want folks to be tough on the issues and questions, but not on people or organizations. Please, no personal attacks, insults, or threats. Listen and assume positive intentions from those who are speaking. Please speak and act professionally. No offensive, disrespectful, or derogatory language, including profanity. Please share your questions or comments in written format online at wdfw.wa.gov/coastalsteelhead. That's our web portal. We talked about that at the last meeting, and we're going to be going over some of the things we heard via that web portal, just to give folks an idea of how that's been going. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But if you don't get called on tonight, or if something comes up after the meeting and you want to share with us, please use the web portal at that web address, insert your question or your comment, and we'll be sure to see it at that point. And again, just saying it again, we want to make sure we hear from as many folks as possible. So we are going to be asking you to limit your questions or comments to one question or one comment per hand raise function. Okay, James, next slide. So just as a reminder, we're here for town hall number 3. It's highlighted there. You can see where we've been up until this point and what we have left to do. I want to call your attention to a change since the last time we were together. There's been a change in the commission schedule. So rather than a briefing in front of the full commission on the 19th, we've been asked to provide the fish committee, the Fish and Wildlife Commission, a briefing on November 17th. I believe that already appears on our website. So just wanted to call your attention to that. If you were looking at the 19th and not seeing this agenda item for the 19th, that's because it's been moved to a fish committee meeting on the 17th. And then we've got one more town hall in front of us between now and December 1. We don't have a date for that yet, but look for that announcement to come out probably by the end of the week, and we'll be looking at the latter half of this month for that conversation, for that town hall. And then December 1, we'll be officially announcing the rules we plan on promulgating for this season. With that, I think I'll turn it over to James to walk us through the agenda in a very brief PowerPoint slide. We're going to spend a little bit of time going over some background information, just recognizing that we might have some folks here who haven't seen the forecast numbers and things like that. But then we're going to get right to your feedback on the options that we're talking about. But James will go through that in a little more detail. James.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, and those that have tuned into the previous town halls, you know, you heard me introduce myself as James Losey, Regional Program Manager, and then, of course, this bigger team, you know, that I work with that includes a bunch of sort of senior level district bios that we have on the call today that have been leading this work. Our Regional Hatchery Operations Manager, Rob Allen's on the call, and then Aaron Couch has been leading the public affairs work. So just want to make sure I flag that those people that I just highlighted, but also their bigger teams are the ones that brought all this work to the place it is today. This map I've shown, this is Region 6, of course. We're focused around the coast, but we've got Puyallup and Nisqually there just to highlight this area we work. It's kind of a reference point. Kelly mentioned we're going to go pretty fast through these topics, particularly the first two. These are real quick, just touch base, make sure if you haven't tracked where we've been, you know where to find that information. We won't dig into it too deep. And then the last bullet here is where we're going to spend most of our time in this presentation, and should leave about 90 minutes at the end for folks to provide feedback. And that's really the objective here, is to share ideas that we've heard to date, analysis on those options, those proposals for fisheries. And then we know there's, you know, a lot of social considerations around those proposals. So if there's a favorite or a proposal everybody, you know, on the line here just can't live with, then we want to know that as we, you know, sort of move into these tribal co-management discussions and do additional technical work. So on this first one here, a couple quick updates. If you've missed the previous town halls, it's important just to you know, build the foundation for where we're at, why there's this higher level of, you know, maybe concern and communication with the public on this. Last year, we saw the lowest total run size of coastal steelhead we have on record. In a number of these rivers, we're expecting even lower returns coming back next year. So these are the coastal steelhead rivers we're really focused on for the discussion, and they're stacked on top of each other here. So you can see total steelhead abundance ranging from about 60,000 to more recent 25,723. We showed this slide last time. This is just a bit of a review from last year. The important points here, you know, tables are hard in presentations, but I just want to show last year we predicted these numbers on the far left for each of these rivers. And then the next column shows the actual fish that return to these rivers. And what you can see is in most cases, the run size actually came in lower than the predicted forecast. And that's been a trend as these populations have declined. Our models have kind of been chasing those predictions. So we've got this history of over forecasting in recent years. I've highlighted in gray the places that we have not met escapement. This is last year's numbers relative to our escapement goal. So you can see in these gray ones, the escapement, the number of fish on the spawning grounds was below the goal. And this has been a trend for these rivers in recent years. The two exceptions represent the Hoh and the Quileute River, where we saw escapement last year above the goal. So if we kind of zoom to like where we're headed in the future, this table here represents the forecasts that are expected, the number of steelhead expected to come back this next year, the season that we're planning. So on the left, this is the actual value for the number of fish expected to return. And then this is prior to fisheries. And then you can see the escapement goal here represents the number of fish we hope to escape these fisheries onto the spawning ground. What you can see is the column on the left in a number of cases is below the escapement goal before anyone goes fishing. So that's what we're talking about here is in places where we have fish above the goal expected return, like the Hoh and the Quileute. So that's this 741 number for the Hoh and the Quileute 2,616. those are the expected fish above the goal. We design fisheries around those fish. And then to target those fish above the goal. And then the ones that are in gray, those represent the fish that are coming below the goal before anyone goes fishing. So we've talked in the past about how our management framework deals with these two scenarios where fish are either coming in above the goal or below. So I won't dig into that. But if you go back and explore that information, what you'll find is we're left with this limit, the sport impact limit, the number of fish that our fisheries can be responsible for harvesting or release mortality in the case of most of our fisheries here. So we'll revisit this table again. And then of course you can go back and look at past presentations. I'm going to back up here. One thing, there's a couple things I need to highlight that I almost forgot. So this sort of category or this sort of agenda item is also important to update things that have changed. And so a couple notes here, the Willapa forecast, you're going to notice this 3,188 number has changed since the last time we were here a few weeks ago at our town hall. So the number is actually decreased by 250 fish. So these are, QAQC technical work that we're doing develops. It's moving fast, but it's important to note the Willapa forecast is about 250 fish lower than it was before. We had a discrepancy in the Chehalis forecast where we had multiple tables in our last presentation where one of them, the number was off. So this 5,681, there was just an error in the graphic. This is the forecast for Chehalis. Another change or just discrepancy was in the Ho sport impact limit, 371. Again, we had tables sort of revealing that graphic different in different places. So correction there. And then the last one in the Quileute River, the run to river forecast, so the number expected to come back, has increased by about 100 fish from where we were last town hall. So again, correcting data, checking people's math, there's a slight change there. Important to note, we shared some modeling work we'd done last town hall, and those corrections I just highlighted had no change to the outcome of that modeling work. So minor in the sense of how they affect our decision making in this season. So kind of housekeeping work, there are people that really said they wanted to see our forecast for hatchery runs. So this discussion is really focused on how to manage wild populations, given the conservation concern, but it is important to note we are expecting hatchery returns to return to most of these rivers. So this is the hatchery forecast. Maybe a reminder that there's a PDF of this whole presentation online. So I really encourage folks to go grab that if you haven't already, and maybe print this off and explore these hatchery returns on your own. But a couple highlights, maybe one highlight is the Bogashil River with 4,169 early timed fish and 578 late timed fish is where the majority or sort of the largest number of these hatchery fish are expected to return. So this is the last slide in sort of this agenda item here. There's these, as we move into modeling these fisheries or trying to predict what we're going to catch in our future fisheries, and we work together, everybody on the phone here, in figuring out where we want to head. There's just these really important considerations that I'm thinking maybe last time I didn't highlight enough based on communication I've had with people after that town hall. So we've highlighted this desire to have in-season tools for steelhead. We have some tools late in the season that we saw last year, like trap counts or maybe red survey work that allows us to see that we have big problems, but we want to increase the resolution on that and sort of understand earlier and with little, maybe a little more precision where we're at in season. So we're working on that, but they're still extremely limited. There's effort shift uncertainty. So we close one river, how that affects another is unknown, but just really due to not a lot of sport fish monitoring that's gone on historically. We have this recent history of over forecasting that I talked about. There's tribal co-management considerations that are really important. we've talked more about in the past, but we can talk more about that tonight if folks want. We have no estimate of mortality associated with poaching. This was highlighted in our last town hall. We have talked to enforcement since that time and kind of explored that idea a little bit more, but we just want to put it out there that that's not part of our modeling. And then there's no unbiased estimate of total sport impact. What that means is sport fish monitoring or creel work is extremely limited on the coast. And none of the creel work provides this really precise estimate of the total number of fish we catch in our sport fisheries, nor has it. We have a few places where we've got published work that demonstrates in limited, one river scenario where we have estimates of total sport encounters, and we're going to lean hard on that work in the future as we kind of manage to this high precision. But I do just want to flag, a lot of people have brought this to our attention, that this is a major limitation for our managing wild steelhead moving forward. And we're agreeing and maybe just highlighting that is one of the major limitations. So that's the sort of background and updates. We shot through that pretty fast, but like I say, there's about 3 hours of material that you can watch where we walked through this season, sort of more information around the background and updates. So for this management framework and 2020-21 review, I think I've got one slide, maybe two. So I'm going to cruise through this pretty quick. So typically we show this in 4 or 5 slides. I don't want to talk about each one of these graphs or dig into what they mean. Rather, I just want to use these as kind of triggers for folks that are going back to the past presentations and want to visit these topics and understand our considerations in terms of fishery management associated with these 4 parameters. So the statewide steelhead management plan is our major kind of guiding document, and it provides this guidance for these different scenarios we're in. But it does so in this framework of these 4 parameters: abundance, productivity, diversity, and distribution. So these 4 parameters are really important. As we go through proposals that we've received, these are the 4 parameters that have really guided us in our decision-making, whether we've got proposals that'll work this season or those that will not. So we'll dig into these more just through our discussion, but important for folks to consider. This is sort of our thinking behind proposals and analysis. Okay, so what we're really here for is to talk about regulatory options. So we've received a lot of feedback, really unique proposals, some creative ideas, and also some of just the core ideas we've used in the past. People have let us know what their preferences are. And so what we've done is we've analyzed regulations mathematically against those 4 parameters and against our escapement goals and management objectives highlighted in the statewide steelhead management plan. So what we're going to do is share proposals that we think provide our analysis suggests that they provide the conservation, meet our conservation goals. But in many rivers, you're going to see there's options. There's maybe 2 or 3 that we believe meet our management objectives, but there may be some social considerations that we want to make sure we flag. So that's going to be the goal here. The first thing I want to highlight in this is that we have a web portal. Kelly mentioned it, where folks can go online and provide feedback. That's a new tool this year. Big thanks to Public Affairs in our group. And it's been really helpful. So we, as of last night was the last time I popped in there and saw the feedback we received, but we had about 120, we had exactly 120 comments in that web portal. So I want to start by sharing what we're seeing in that feedback. So this is just kind of a screenshot of what that web portal looks like if you haven't used it. This is really wide open. We've got a whole bunch of questions. I've tried to answer those, but there's still some, I got work to do on my to-do list with questions. But what we noticed was the majority of these comments, people were using this portal to tell us what type of fishery they wanted or a fishery that they just did not want. And that was great. So that was sort of a nice indication of what the social considerations are around different fishery proposals. So I highlighted that in this pie graph. And I think what's important to note is, of those 120, I think about 81 of them were focused specifically around regulations. And of those, 59% of them made it extremely clear that their preference would be a full closure. So maximum effort toward conservation of wild steelhead through a full closure of all coastal steelhead rivers. We also, though, had a large proportion of people that communicated that last year's regulation was preferable to them, and it met both, sort of conservation and angling preferences. And then we had this one that says diverse regulation, 6% represents ones that didn't fit into these clear categories, but also highlighted really important consideration for a preference toward lots of different regulations across the landscape. So this would allow fishing from boats in some places, allow bait in some places, and then places where boats weren't allowed. So this is sort of more of a tapestry of regulations was the preference here. And some would preferred an early closure. And then, of course, there was a smaller group of people that felt like these conservation considerations were unnecessary, and we should be moving back to our traditional fisheries, labeled here as the status quo. But it is also, I just want to flag here in the bottom, I put some bullets. There were a lot of other themes. Many of these comments, there was a desire to improve sport fish monitoring, improve abundance estimates for wild steelhead through trapping and technology that we know is available. There was this discussion around poaching, and of course, controlling marine mammals and release more hatchery fish. So these are just topics I want to flag that we're hearing these topics, and plan on addressing each one of them if we haven't already through answers to those questions. So this is really the meat of the presentation now. We've gotten lots of feedback, cool proposals. We've analyzed those and put them into these 7 major proposals that are up for consideration. And then also flagged other ideas that are in our toolkit here that are being considered in a variety of ways, and we can talk more about them, but want to make sure folks know these are also topics in the bottom. And then I put these boxes down below. Those are our 4 parameters. And these are really the 4 parameters we're targeting to meet. So the best rules, or the group of the best rules, will check all these boxes. So I'm going to go through these one at a time, try to do this quickly so people know what we're talking about when we say status quo or last year's regulation. So this first rule is the coastwide closure. I'm not going to read each one of these bullets because I'm going to show you slide by slide here. So this proposal 1 is a coastwide closure. It's kind of the simplest to describe. It's close to fishing in coastal rivers from December 1, when wild steelhead begin entering these rivers, through April 30th. So there's pros and cons. This provides maximum protection. It's an easy one to enforce. There's potential for late opening if there's indications in season that the run's coming in larger than expected. Obviously, the con here is that there's limited access to hatchery fish and also wild. There's closure on rivers where escapement goals are likely to be met, like the Quileute. We assume there'd be an impact to the coastal economy. I think that's a pretty fair assumption with this rule. And then, one big part of our management strategy is folks interacting with wild steelhead are those, that often come to the table first to protect them. So there's an important point there about displacing these advocates through a full closure. Proposal 2, we labeled here as the status quo. This one's pretty complex, right? The best way to understand this rule is to open your fishing pamphlet from a couple years ago. So really the pro here is there's regulation diversity. There's kind of something for everyone. So that's a major pro with the status quo. It maximizes access to hatchery and wild steelhead, because that's what a lot of these fishery regulations were designed to do, to put people in the place to catch fish and have sort of the best opportunity they can. The cons are, we've exceeded objectives in recent years, and this has been a static regulation in a lot of places, not everywhere. There have been regulation changes, but there's an argument that suggests that these regulations haven't shifted with increasing effort and declining abundance. And we've kind of showcased that challenge in past town halls. Proposal 3, last year's regulation, I've listed it up here, but the major feature of this is the no fishing from a floating device rule. So we used the tools last year that provided the maximum assurance that we were going to reduce impact on wild steelhead through reduction in catch. I want to highlight here that last couple town halls, we've shared our own data from Ho Creole documenting catch pre-net effort. Some folks that have explored the data with us have highlighted this uncertainty around our estimate of total fish caught based on expansions and some more complicated math. So these are really fair criticisms in a place where we don't have a full estimate of total catch. So we're leaning hard here on this idea that there's an assumed reduction in catch when we move anglers from the boat to the bank. This graph shows one tile from a published paper by Cale Bentley out of our shop on the lower Ho River. And what this shows is the change in catch per unit effort for those fishing from boats and the shore. Specifically here, it highlights guide boats, private boaters, drifters, and plunkers. But in Cale's report, he demonstrates that folks fishing from boats have an up to 5 times catch rate as those from the shore. So we don't believe that changing, and I think we talked about this last year, but when we move anglers from the boat to the shore, we've got some of our most skilled anglers now fishing from the shore. So we have never expected a 5-fold difference. Our data suggests about a 56% or maybe 50% change. So that's the number we've used to model is 50%. That's the best data available, but there is some criticism that likely there's even an increased savings or potentially less. So there's been a healthy discussion around that. Just wanted to share it with folks. So an alternative to this rule is allowing folks to fish from their boat still and going back to those regulations, but getting the same level of savings that you would from the no fishing from a boat by reducing the days on the water. So one assumption with this rule is that if you want to reduce impact to wild steelhead by 50%, you would need to reduce days, but we know a reduction in days by 50% doesn't necessarily mean a reduction in catch by 50%. And what that means is if you take a 7-day week, turn it into a 3.5-day week, that's half, you don't see half the number of fish caught. And this has been demonstrated pretty clearly in the Skagit, where we have, a total estimate of catch and our Creole estimate there. And this may not surprise people, but when we shift to a 4-day week, what we often see is those savings from those closed days are soaked up pretty rapidly on the first day of fishing. So if you've taken part in that fishery, the first day it opens every week is definitely a good day of fishing if the weather allows. So there's some assumptions there about how do you shave 50% of catch. And our math here, based on working the Skagit and other species in Puget Sound, like Chinook fisheries and coho, tell us that 1 day of weekend fishing is worth about 3 days of fishing during the week. And either of those is about a 50% savings in catch. So this would allow anglers to choose here on this call and through discussions over the next 2 weeks. If we move forward with a rule like this, would there be preference toward a Sunday only fishery where you get to fish from your boat, or a Tuesday through Thursday fishery where you get to fish from your boat? Or would you prefer 7 days a week fishing from your boat? So you'll see how these can be sort of mixed and matched in our fisheries. So the pros here is it maintains diverse opportunity in the face of this conservation concern and allows access to hatchery and wild fish. The major con here is there's a lot of uncertainty around catch reduction and shift in effort when we make these changes. Proposal 5 is similar. This proposal here allows you to fish from your boat in just certain places. So we explored all of these coastal rivers and said, if we have to move forward with regulations from last year, are there certain places we could, create some increased opportunity for folks to use their boat? So more surgical approach to how we operate these regulations. So I'll walk more through that, but the pros here are pretty obvious. But the second bullet in the pro, I think, is important. It liberalizes opportunity where it exists. So we want to make sure that's a consideration. We've heard from the public that's important. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty around catch. So that's a big one there. And then this last bullet, if our tribal co-managers and us as fishery managers see that this shift in effort is something that was unexpected. So all of a sudden we have these small locations with a lot of people fishing from boat in a way that we didn't expect. That could lead to a in-season closure, which could have an effect on steelhead diversity and distribution. So we're kind of rounding it out here, almost done. So we've got this fish from a boat with reduced hour rule. So this is another alternative. Rather than closing days on the water, we could allow people to fish from their boats by reducing the hours. So this is a proposal we received from the public, and it's same target where we're trying to produce a reduction in total catch. We've modeled this here where opening from sunrise to noon during the fishery sort of steelhead season would shave the total daylight hours by 50%. And the idea is it would produce a reduction in catch. Unfortunately, not to the level, it's not proportional, just like the day closure I talked about. We wouldn't expect a 50% reduction in catch. But in some places, this might be a good alternative. The major con with this one is it just hasn't been tried, unless we're talking about sturgeon fisheries or maybe some limited use in other places. So the expectation that we would catch fewer fish by closing at noon is really untested for us. So, but this is an option we analyzed and we'll explore that. And then the last one here is if we determine that last year's regulations don't work in some rivers in terms of their level of savings, it just isn't enough, then we could have the no fishing from a boat rule and other conservation measures, but just on certain days. So it'd be kind of doubling down on this constraint around fishing. And that could create opportunity in some rivers that are really like chronic areas for meeting escapement goals. So I'm gonna move to kind of the last piece of this, and this is going to be our major discussion topic. So this is an extremely busy table, and I tried to create some tools for us to walk through it slowly, but this is the best way to do it, is for us to just spend a minute looking at this table. What I've done here, maybe I'll walk through it slow. On the left, these are our rivers we're focused on. The next column represents this number of fish that we have, we could describe as on the table for impacts. And the goal here is not to harvest each one of these fish or have these fish as a result of mortality, catch and release mortality, but rather not exceed this estimate. So in every case, we want to design fisheries that will result in the harvest or release mortality of fewer than the number of fish we see here. So you can look on your own here and see these numbers, and you'll recognize that the Quileute, of course, has the greatest number of fish, 1,308 available to design a fishery around, and then it decreases in other places. So the way this table works is we can go to a rule like the full closure, and we can color the boxes based on the regulations in that area, whether they're open or closed. So under the full closure scenario, this is an easy one. Every one of these rivers would be closed. And so I've highlighted all those boxes red. It's worth noting there's some asterisks down here. There's no, all these regulations require co-manager approval, of course, or agreement. None of these account for a legal catch. That was a concern in our last town hall. And then none of them account for over forecasting. So these are really leaning hard on our forecast that's agreed to with tribal co-managers. So then if we kind of move to the right here, we can see there's this status quo regulation. So this is the one that's in our pamphlet from the past. You can see that our modeling work suggests that the regulation in the past, our status quo regulation, does not suffice to meet these management objectives. There's a couple caveats here. I put little kind of cartoons here that demonstrate that, on the Hoe and the Quileute, this was extremely tight. We're really close to these goals. We can almost get there with confidence that we'll meet them, but there's this concern for shift in effort where the margin of error is tight. And in the Quileute, we've got these tributary specific goals or conservation concerns that are at a finer scale than just basin wide. So what this should tell us here is last year's, the status quo regulations, are not acceptable in this case based on our modeling. Last year's regulations may work in some places, but we're either looking for similar conservation sort of level or increasing in some areas. So I'll just go to one more row here so you can see the way this table works is in last year's regulation. So this was no fishing from a boat. I walked through that. I think we're on the same page. Some of these boxes turn green. So in the Willapa Bay, we're expected to catch, or our fishery result in less than 319 dead wild steelhead under last year's regulation in the Willapa. Not so in the Chehalis, hump tulips, upper Quinault, or Queets. Last year's regulation isn't enough. And then in the Hoe and the Quileute, those would suffice. So those are acceptable regulations. So we can move through all those ones that I talked about, 1 through 7, and you can see different boxes light up. And so one scenario might help us walk through this is if we went to a full closure. I've highlighted in bold here the way the regulations would look. All these rivers would be closed. We could shift to something like last year's regulations, and we'd see that we've got 3 rivers open, and you can imagine there's concerns there about these effort shifts and where do people that typically fish Grace Harbor, Upper Quinault, and Queets go fishing, or do they not? So that's a question mark. Another alternative would be folks really want to fish from their boats, and that's acceptable mathematically with these reduction in days. So the goal here now, I hope if folks are tracking, these 2 regulations I just walked through are kind of a mix and match. Like we could replace last year's regulation with a more traditional regulation with a reduction in days. And then we're managing these by rivers, sort of river specific regulations. These aren't like a one size fits all. Last year, it sure felt like that because this process can lead us to one regulation for all rivers. But if we look more specifically river by river, we could end up with a hybrid approach like this, where in Willapa Bay, we have last year's regulations, and in the Hoe, we do as well. But places like the Quileute, we may look for these very specific areas in the Quileute River where we could target hatchery fish from our boats 7 days a week. And then other places in the watershed where fishing from a boat isn't allowed. And then these high concern areas like hump tulips, Upper Quinault, and Queets in this scenario, could have this more surgical approach where we say we're going to use last year's regulations to get us on the water with these reduction in days in addition. So we could have kind of a suite of regulations, and then there's hopefully regulations sort of package on this tile matrix that I haven't thought of or that isn't here listed, and you could change different boxes around. And so this is where I sort of hope to lead the conversation. And I hope we kind of simplified this approach enough for kind of healthy discussion here. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly, and then we can return back to that slide when we need it.
Yeah, thanks, James. So now we're kind of hoping to turn the mic over to you all. So please, again, if you've got a question, raise your hand. We also have this Q&A function that we'll be looking to, and you can see the Zoom reminders there for how to operate that raise hand function. So Leah, who's first in the queue?
First up, we have Rich. Rich, I have allowed you to unmute.
Yeah, hi, this is Rich. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, thanks again for letting us comment and providing the information so we can make some informed decisions here. Again, I'm going to bring up, we're kind of really missing the bigger picture here. I'm going to keep banging the drum on that. We're down to the last wild stocks that are maybe even potentially could even have a fishery compared to everything else that we've lost. And until people realize that, I think we're kind of sunk. we gotta like do something drastic, in my opinion. And I'll just kind of leave it at that and let other people talk.
Thanks, Rich.
And next up is Christian. Christian, I have allowed you to unmute.
Thank you, Leah. How's it going? Yeah, James, so you pulled up that first slide with the forecasts for the last, 20 years or whatever for the entire peninsula.
Yeah, yep.
So the majority of this data comes from creel surveys and tribal catch, right? And then I guess some of these rivers have spawner surveys done, but some of them don't, you said?
Yeah, so no, that's not totally right, but it's close. So creel surveys just have not been a big part of our work, and not because we don't think it's valuable, but it just isn't where most of our efforts gone. It's really gone towards spawning ground escapement estimates. So that total run size includes our estimates of catch from the past, tribal estimates of catch from the past, and spawning ground surveys. So escapement estimates.
So the creel surveys, the spawner surveys, and then the much is how y'all got it. I mean, y'all do some I guess helicopter surveys, right?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah, helicopter, flight, float, and walking surveys. Yep.
Right. All right. So you also quote Cale Bentley a lot. Have you read his paper on the creel survey and on the peninsula, specifically on the Hoe and the Quileute? I think he came up with over 15 to 20 solutions to improve it. Do you know how many of those have been implemented since the 2017 survey or study, the WDFW study?
Yeah, you're right on. That report I have read and our staff have rallied around it. It's really what we've got in terms of peer-reviewed work on sport fish and counter rates. And Cale, you're right, lists recommendations really well in there. And no, not all of those recommendations have been incorporated in our creel estimates to date,
Right.
but I can speak for my whole team when I say we would love to move forward with the Bentley et al. Recommendations. And we're really looking for the resources to do that. So I think you're right on there. So thanks.
Right. Y'all keep harping on the underestimation though, and in his overestimation, and in his study, he finds out y'all are grossly underestimating. So is it underestimating or overestimating? Because I'm trying to figure it out.
Yep.
Really, I care about this. I'm going through the data, and a lot of this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I understand, and I'm sensitive to that. So I'm going to answer that, but then I think we keep moving. And what would be really nice if you and I could talk again after this, because there's a lot to this. But I think you're actually right on the mark there. That we have been underestimating catch in many of our rivers. And the Bentley et al. Report provides a point estimate and a range of high and low estimates. So
all right, but you just said at the beginning of the presentation that we were overestimating.
Oh, if I did, then I misspoke.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about how we're overestimating the runs. Last year we did. I guess you said we overestimated last year's run. I don't know how you can use this creel data, and I don't know, man.
Let me answer that because it's important. Yeah, thanks for that. So just for everybody listening here, there's an important nuance there. I think maybe I didn't misspeak. We've overestimated the run size coming back each year in terms of our prediction. So we have a forecast each year. We've over predicted in the last 4 or 5 years in most rivers. So that's an over prediction of the total run size. That's important. So some forecast accuracy issues there. That's a little different than our sport creel estimates, where we're likely coming up with an underestimate of total sport catch. A lot of details there we can talk about more. So thanks for the questions. Let's keep moving. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Are we gonna have time to throw recommendations in also at the end for river, I guess, ideas?
Yeah, I recommend you throw your hand back up and we keep moving so we can
All right,
get
awesome.
some of
Thank
those
you.
recommendations. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay, next up is John. John, I have enabled you to unmute.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Great. This is John McMillan. I'm the Steelhead Science Director with Trout Unlimited's Wild Steelhead Initiative. I want to say hey to Kelly and James and thank, of course, WWF staff for putting this together and doing all the work over the last 3 weeks. As many people know, I've lived up here a long time. I moved to the OP in 1997. And when I did, I thought it was a place where the fisheries would last forever. I don't want to get into the social issues. I'm going to try and stick to the science. But there are 4 reasons that I think a fishery closure is the right step for this year. And first, I think as James has talked about a little bit in some of his presentations, these forecasts are paper fish. And forecasts are fraught with error. And like James kind of mentioned, last year, some of those forecasts were high. And it's not uncommon for forecasts to be high. That is one of the challenges of working with really noisy and uncertain fishery data. The challenge is if these run sizes come in much smaller, substantially so than what is forecast, we could be in a deficit, right? And experience a significant and unexpected hit for those wild populations that are already teetering on the threshold of an ESA listing. And second, most of the populations in the OP are on a long-term decline over their period of record. And recent run sizes have been some of, if not the lowest on record. And I think it will take significant actions like fishery closures and poor run years to stem the decline and reverse the trend. But that in and of itself, of course, will not solve everything. Still, trying to reverse this trajectory and get our fish and the fisheries back on track is going to take big action, and that will not be possible if we continue to test these escapement goals with our fisheries. Third, again, just there is tremendous uncertainty, and it's really hard to convey this to non-scientists at times. I think James and the department have done a nice job. But there are a lot of uncertainty over the overall fishery impacts. For instance, what are the levels of poaching? How many smolts and juveniles are caught and killed by anglers? And further, each year we really don't have a good understanding of what happens when you have these very high encounter rates that we've experienced on the OP. Or for example, just what happens when you catch and release a fish. A recent study on Atlantic salmon, just published about a few weeks ago, found that female Atlantic salmon that were caught and released had a reproductive fitness that was only 73% of uncaught females. What happens if she's caught twice or thrice? This is all new literature. I don't expect WWF or any other agency to be up to task right now to deal with this quantitatively. But let's be clear, the current CNR mortality estimate of 10%, while it is conservative, and I appreciate that, does not account for these types of sublethal impacts, nor does it account for the poaching or effects on juveniles. Fourth, this problem has gone on for way too long without being sufficiently addressed. A report by WFW in 1975 reveals that back then staff were already concerned. A quote on the Queets is, "A serious declining trend has been evident in the Queets since 1972. These steelhead stocks need substantial protections. For these reasons and others, I'm asking that we try and put a stop to this Groundhog Day, this kind of recurring nightmare where we wake up and think things are okay because they're not okay. And if we don't take strong action this year, like fishery closure, the next inevitable step is an ESA listing and continued interruptions to fisheries in the foreseeable future." Again, just thank you for all the hard work, and that's it.
Thank you, John. Next is Ed. Ed, I've allowed you to unmute.
Thank you. The question, I've got a very simple question. With all of these options, is it your goal/assumption that the co-managers would also adopt these rules for their fisheries?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So we've got allocation agreements. So what you'll notice here for the Quileute River, 1,308 fish. Our expectation and the discussions we're having with Quileute tribal co-managers, these are sensitive discussions, right? To make sure we support the treaty right there. But our expectation is there would be, a equal conservation sort of ethic with those fisheries. And what I'll say, those conversations are going on, but we've seen our tribal co-managers on the coast really take the lead in a lot of these discussions in terms of conservation. So we expect to have an outcome that we can all move forward with and be confident we're going to meet our management objectives. So, yep, thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I couldn't get my unmute button. Next up is Paul. Paul, I have allowed you to unmute.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. I apologize. I came in late about 5:20, so this might have been addressed in the beginning, but with all the rules and everything that we're discussing, I was just wondering when we'll find out what the rules are going to be for the upcoming season.
Yep. Paul, thanks. Good question. So we've got a matrix in front of us right now. The green boxes represent those rules that could potentially move forward for each river. So interested in feedback on that. So hoping in the next 2 weeks, we've got rules agreed to by tribal co-managers, ones that our director feels are fit to move forward with. So a couple weeks is where we're targeting.
Great. And then my last question for you too, James, is I just was looking for clarification. When we're talking about boats, does that pertain also to flotation devices, i.e. pontoons?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, fishing from a floating device is the way to describe that rule. So good clarification there. Thanks, Paul.
Awesome. You're welcome. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you so much for your guys' time, and I appreciate it.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Next is Wes. Wes, I've allowed you to unmute.
Hey, just some clarifications on points tonight. So closure, full closure means full sport closure, and possibly reductions with the tribe would be your expectation, but unknown. Is that right?
Unknown is a good way to describe it, because some of the constraints that we have here, like sport fish monitoring uncertainty and shift in effort, may not be concerns for our tribal co-managers in their like respective usual and custom fishing grounds.
Yep.
So if we ended up moving forward with a closure in the Hoh River, for instance, the expectation isn't necessarily that the Hoh tribe would close. So those are discussions we're having now. So thanks.
Okay. And related. So as I brought up in the first town hall, you have a discrepancy. You do not have an agreed to escapement goal on the Queet system. You have a department goal of 4,200 and a tribal goal of 2,500. And your run size falls between. So you're saying 160, but it's probably looking to the tribes like there's 700 fish surplus to their escapement goal. So I'll be interested in seeing how you propose to balance that, if that's really the view.
Yep, you got it. You highlighted an important challenge that we're dealing with, where we have an unagreed to escapement goal between tribal co-managers, and that's one of the discussions that's on the agenda. So thanks for highlighting that.
And I'll get off after this. Poaching, could you just, people are talking about poaching. In the modeling, poaching would only make the run size larger if you included a specific allowance for it. Is that correct?
Yeah, Wes, I'm going to try to be respectful for the other people's time too, but it's a little more complex than just adding poaching to 1 year or multiple years and seeing it increase, because all the data is, connected there. So we've got forecasts and escapements and all those pieces. So thanks, Wes.
Thank you.
And next up is Bridgette. Bridgette, I have allowed you to unmute. Bridgette, are you there? Okay, you may need to log off and log back on again. We'll go to Rob. Rob, I have allowed you to unmute.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to just say I think that the department's done a good job at trying to involve the public. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I appreciate it. I am interested in seeing some things crafted to still keep us on the water. While I recognize there are places that we probably need to be off of the water, I was kind of disappointed last year Like when the upper portion of the Skookumchuck was closed, even though they'd already met program and a lot of other things. So I'm hoping that you are looking at tailoring the fisheries so that we can still have some opportunity. And I'm really concerned about dropout rate that's being used by the tribes. It's only 2% from what I understand. And there's a lot of studies that have shown with other fisheries in Canada where the dropout rate is in excess of 30% with other types of fish. And I don't think that, I kind of think 2% is laughable. And I know that that's something we would have to get the tribes to agree to, but I think that we need to encourage some sort of a study for that. The fourth thing is I'm really worried about the early wild fish because we've targeted the tribes or encouraged the tribes to take all of their fish during the time when the hatchery fish are there. And we used to have substantial runs of early fish like in the Queets and some of the other rivers, and we've just about wiped those out. So I just wanted to bring up a couple of things along those lines.
Appreciate that, Rob. Thanks. And Rob, so you know, we're taking notes here. I'm not saying I appreciate it. Move on. Just so you know, we're taking notes here. So I got all the things you said. Appreciate it.
And next is Asa. Asa, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hey there, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Asa Menlove, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to provide some comment here. So as wild coastal steelhead returns continue to decline each year, I think difficult decisions must be made to prioritize the health of the peninsula's ecosystems and protects the intrinsic value that exists in wild fish. We are and have been in a consistent period of decline for many years now, and if trends like this continue, which they certainly will without bold action, OP fish face a future of extinction. And so for that reason, I'm asking WDFW to close all seasons in Olympic Peninsula fisheries for the 2021 and 22 season. As the state of our ecosystems continue to decline, I think it's imperative that we move away from worldviews that are extractive and exploitative and embrace those that celebrate intrinsic value and healthy ecology. And I think that the closure of fisheries this season is a necessary first step toward a future in which wild fish and humans exist in collaboration and not competition. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, Asa.
And next is Brian. Brian, I've allowed you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
Great. Yeah, I want to thank you guys for responding to most of my questions that I've sent you in the last week or so. I proposed kind of one of the options, or you incorporated some of my proposals for one of the options on select rivers, select areas to have fishing from a boat. And my main concern with respect to that is the statutory mandate to the agency with respect to providing opportunity for all citizens, including the juvenile, disabled, and seniors, who I think are disproportionately affected by not being able to fish out of a boat, a stable platform, so to speak. So I appreciate you analyzing that option, but I just wanted to point out, it's not an all or nothing deal. It doesn't have to be 7 days a week. If you're going to have some of these rivers open, and I realize there's some that may not be able to be opened, but where you have some flexibility on the Hoe and on the Quileute in particular, it can be a number of days per week, or it can be, you can incorporate that hours per day element in there as well. But I think you can be creative and provide some opportunity for at least, the disabled and, senior anglers that really just can't walk the banks on rivers like the Solduck and Klawon stuff, and it's just really tough for them. And even if it means something like fishing out of a floating device that is, anchored and not floating down or something, I think you need to provide opportunity for those folks to meet the spirit of your statutory mandate. I have a lot of other questions and comments. I'll submit those in writing, but that's the main point I wanted to make to you tonight. Thank you.
Hey, Brian, let me say I've appreciated all the thoughtful comments over the last week. You provide an opportunity to highlight one feature of the table here So if we look at the Haute River, we've highlighted here in bold the last year's regulation as an option that would work, as well as what would also work is fishing from a boat, reduced days. One option we heard from, I'm not remembering if it was you or not, but we could have a December through the end of January opportunity where we have fish from a boat, reduced days. And then February 1, we would switch to a 7-day a week, no fishing from a boat. So those nuances you've talked about, I think there's room for those in this table here. So thanks for highlighting that.
Okay, and now, David, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hello there, Kelly and James. David Moskowitz with Conservation Angler, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight, and appreciate the presentations. It's always a lot to take in. I'd like to make a couple of points, and perhaps I don't know if they're questions, but they're concerns I have about this, the ability to come up with what could be some pretty interesting but complex rules. And I feel that the ability to actually assess the impact of those, I think really needs to be called into question. I think a number of points have been made about that tonight. I think somebody referred to the paper fish in the forecast and how we have often and regularly overestimated the runs and underestimated the creel. It's a kind of a double whammy. The issue of a dropout rate at 2% in the tribal fisheries is worthy of examination. And there's also been questions about the effectiveness, validity, and of whether these escapement goals for each of these rivers is sufficient. And the fact that we're not meeting them with the current fisheries for a while does call them all into question. I think also it would be really helpful if you and Kelly were able to talk about the ability of the department and the state police to actually enforce some of these complex rules over a pretty wide geographic area and over a pretty long period of time. If poaching is not necessarily accounted for and enforcement resources are limited, that is a real concern in trying to invoke a several seasons that allow people to fish on a very low run. So that's something I'd really like to hear about, because I think that's a real limitation, I think, to be able to make some of these regulations effective if you don't have adequate enforcement. The other issue, just breaking down the Quileute, which is everybody's favorite and has a pretty strong run. It's some pretty amazing rivers. But those 4 rivers, the Dickey, the Kalawa, and the Bogashio, and the Solduck, are not the same. And the fish returning to them face various challenges. And obviously that big group of hatchery fish returning, the early run fish returning to Bogashio, has everybody's mouth watering. And I think that's the case just about everywhere there are these hatchery fish. But as several people have mentioned, that hatchery fishery, that take fishery, and probably the subsequent pressure for the tribes to fish on these hatchery fish, have taken these winter fish, the early winter wild fish, down to very low levels. And those are the fish that really were the most abundant historically. So we will continue to lose that genetic diversity of this wild, group of wild winter steelhead on the peninsula. And with climate change, it puts the burden on these late returning wild fish that may be facing warmer springs, hotter summers, lower rivers. And so we are basically robbing our seed bank by considering fisheries aimed at hatchery fish that are going to disproportionately affect these wild winter early returning fish. And the conservation angler is opposed to that across the board. And unless you can answer how these fisheries are not going to affect those wild fish, we strongly support a closure on the Olympic Peninsula. Really appreciate the hard work. And I know, James, that you have a really hardworking staff of people in the field, in the office, and backed up with Kelly. And we've really appreciated how you have conducted this stuff under a lot of pressure. And we hope that you will act on behalf of the fish. And I think just a final comment, while I enormously respect Brian McLaughlin and his understanding of these things, that mandate to provide access for all citizens, including juvenile, disabled, and senior citizens, it says the commission shall attempt. What's ahead of that are 4 bullets from that statute that say shall preserve, shall conserve, consistent with the goal. Does not impair the supply of these resources. Those are the legal things that all come before giving people the chance to fish.
Hey, David.
The fish have to come. Thanks. The fish have to come first. I know I always go over time, Kelly. I appreciate your patience.
Thanks for your
thanks
comments.
a lot.
Thanks for your comments.
Hey, Kelly, Dave asked a couple things here that provide us an opportunity to answer questions someone else might have. I'll just say briefly, for all of these green boxes folks are looking at, there's risk associated with them, right? This is an analysis we conducted that suggests all these green boxes represent fisheries that have a high degree of certainty that will meet our management objectives in that sport impact limit. So that's why they're green. But David brings a point up about the risk associated with those green versus red boxes. So I just want to highlight that that is part of our analysis, and we appreciate the consideration for that.
Thank you. Jonathan, I have allowed you to unmute.
All right, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, James and Kelly. I know you guys have put a lot of extra effort into this process over the course of the past 6 months. And, I definitely appreciate that. But I mean, at this point, I got to ask, what the heck are we doing right now? What are we really trying to accomplish with these fisheries by, trying to squeeze out the last few fish of these runs as they, circle the drainage of species? I would have been much more kind of supportive of these creative fisheries 10 years ago when, we regularly brought kind of these conservation regulations in front of the commission and staff. And, James, well, I know you're working hard to, get this ship in the right direction. It kind of feels like we're a little, too little, too late at this point. I think the bottom line here is you need to find a way to put an end to this pressure that's coming into the department and the commission to get us back to the status quo fisheries. We have to stop using these fisheries like we're living paycheck to paycheck. And, one thing that really struck a chord with me tonight is that 60% of the comments that have come in this far are requesting full closures. And that shows that, anglers are willing to give these fish a break for a little bit in the short term while we kind of, bank them for the long term. And so my concerns with, everything that has been presented and all the numbers that you put out there are kind of these. The winter steelhead runs on the coast are precipitously low in most basins. Last year, 5 of the 7, I think, major basins did not meet their escapement goals. The forecast models came in almost 15% over the actual goals, and the sport impact data that is being used to help guide these fisheries for this upcoming season, as you have pointed out, talking about the matrix there with the green boxes and the uncertainties. It doesn't really provide any reasonable buffer for these runs to provide these status quo fisheries. And I know too tonight there are a lot of legislators and commissioners that have been interested in this topic too. So I'd ask them if they're listening, and of course to you and the staff, if these fishery options that, you guys are presenting here are in line with the WDFW's legislative mandate, which calls for conservation first, as, as David, previously pointed out. And, the key word in that phrase is in a manner that is consistent with, and then you get into the second part about economic well-being and prosecuting fisheries, et cetera. So, as I mentioned earlier, I think this, the sport impact table does not provide, any room to really discuss these fisheries and slicing and dicing them as we're doing it. And, as some are requesting, especially the status quo fisheries. Some of my concerns are the unknowns, and I think, James, you hit on some of these, but, to properly manage these fisheries moving forward include like these unaccounted numbers of the fish, that are harvested to poaching. As I said, the overestimation of the runs of the forecast models, the lack of accountability for the shift in angler effort, these are all kind of starred on your presentation there. The severe gaps in the catch monitoring data, the modeling estimates for the encounter rates with the fish, and then of course an understanding of how these higher encounter rates influence the, the fitness of not only the individuals and life histories, but the overall populations. So that's it. I'll submit some of these comments. Thank you guys for, all the work you're doing. And I really do hope you take these factors into consideration, in your further decisions for these steelhead and the fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Ryan, I have allowed you to unmute.
Yeah, I guess I'll buck the trend here and just bring up the fact that we have seen full closures not work in Bridgette Sound. We've seen full closures not work in a number of areas for reversing declines in steelhead numbers. I think it's really important that we keep people interested in steelhead so that they care about them, so they continue to want to supply funding to the department, so the department gets accurate information when they're getting it from anglers. I think especially in the Hoe and the Quileute system, there is some wiggle room here to keep anglers on the water, keep them interested, keep them caring about fish. And I think that that's getting lost on a lot of the people in the conservation community, that without anglers caring about these fish, they're going to go away quicker. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
And Rich, I have allowed you to unmute.
Yeah, hey, I just wanted to add a little bit more perspective and just really kind of talk about, in all my years of steelhead fishing, pretty much close to my whole life. I'm 64 years old now. And really, it's like I've witnessed way too many of our wild steelhead fisheries close or be lost, due to decline and finally collapsed. And I've also experienced the same human and management responses time after time. There's angler denial, there's the entitlement element, there's also the short-term economic concern argument. And these all seem to prevail at the expense of a sustainable wild steelhead protections or recovery efforts to build a brighter future for this, fish. So, again, I grew up fishing on the peninsula rivers and a lot of the coastal streams for that matter. And I'm just really concerned that I've never seen the populations of the fish struggle this bad. And I'm kind of like same thing with Jonathan. It's like, what are we kind of doing here? I'm concerned for the next generation of anglers. My kids just they started fishing for them. They've enjoyed it, of course, and I understand. But, what's their future to be able to have? I had my chance. I got to fish, but I'm looking at other people in the future of being able to have this opportunity. And, it's again, we continue to have this, shifting baseline in our short-sighted nature as human beings when we look at this stuff. And, it's just kind of really bothersome. Our focus right now seems to be maximizing how much we can squeeze out of these rivers instead of how we can truly stem the losses and begin rebuilding some populations and hopefully preserve our angling opportunities for the future. that's really to me what's kind of about here. It's like, yeah, I get it. I mean, I'm an advocate. I'm an angler. I like to be fishing. I know it's harder to be an advocate when you're not fishing, but at some point, where do you draw the line? Where do you start saying, I got to put the fish first, because if they don't, then it's gone forever. And I also look at it too as a lot of times we put things into place in a very reactive nature. We're always in a reactive mode. We seem to have a hard time trying to manage our fisheries from a proactive standpoint and really kind of put these, whatever it is, regulations or practices in place proactively and ahead of the ball game before everything starts going down the tube, right? And I don't know how to get us back on this track of trying to look at things a little bit more proactively. Right now, we're in a reactive situation. We should have been, again, it's hard to say we should have been, but we should have been a lot more proactive a long time ago when a lot of concepts were brought to the table and they were basically shoved away. So I'll just leave it at that. I just wanted to share a little bit more perspective, and thanks again for your guys' time and all your hard work, because I know it's been a tough one and you're coming up with the information so we can make good decisions. So thanks again.
Robert, I have allowed you to unmute. Robert, are you there? It looks like you're unmuted on our end. You may need to rejoin and come back. And Bridgette, I have allowed you to unmute.
Okay, let's try this. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm on hour 10 straight of Zoom meetings, so I think my computer is just about as over it as I am. Sorry about that. Yeah, so Bridgette Moran here, recreational angler from up here in Bellingham. Thanks again for these town hall meetings. It's really clear that James and Kelly especially have spent an extraordinary amount of time on this. So thank you. I'm not usually a huge advocate for jumping to the last resort, which I think in this case would be a total closure. I recognize the importance of understanding and trying to accommodate everyone's needs, but at this point, it doesn't fucking matter what anyone needs. At its core, this is a fish issue, not a people issue. And the fish just aren't here. Coastal steelhead can't sustain anyone's needs right now, and they definitely won't be able to do so in the future if we don't intervene effectively right now. So just shut the whole thing down already. This is honestly getting ridiculous. I'm with Jonathan and Rich. Like, I'm sitting up here on Skagit having to listen to people moan about restrictions and closures. Like, give me a break. We've got the chance to prevent coastal steelhead from following in the footsteps of Puget Sound steelhead. And I can't understand why people are expecting a different result from the same level of inaction. So to me, that's the definition of idiocy. We're acting like a pack of dogs fighting over the last tortilla thrown out behind a Taco Bell. This is embarrassing, to be honest. I also want to just kind of respond here, just to be clear, my love and my advocacy for these fish isn't going anywhere. And I honestly resent any accusation that all conservationists will simply vanish if we make these sacrifices. Some of us are here to protect the fish, not our own self-interests. So anyway, now I'm all riled up. Please just shut it down. Point made. Thank you.
Thanks, Bridgette. And next is Nick. Nick, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So first, just want to thank both of you and all your staff for everything you've done here. I can tell you're put in a ton of time and you're here after hours. And, I just have one point to make, which is that, when talking about different opportunities you may be able to provide, I appreciate all the creative thinking. I have one concern, which is really over early timed, early entering winter steelhead. And, these fish are likely necessary for recovery of wild steelhead in the North Olympic Peninsula streams, as well as even more so when we think about adaptation to climate change and earlier onset of summer. These early returning fish are likely to be almost necessary for us to reopen fisheries in the future and have sort of these sustainable year-to-year wild steelhead fisheries. So, my concern is really centered over the best remaining wild steelhead rivers. So really largely the Quileute and the Hoh, and these places where you've kind of identified some of these diversity concerns. And so I guess, when I'm talking, I support a closure as with many other people here, but I think that, there is potential to maybe leave some of these hatchery-based fisheries open in other places that do provide that sort of opportunity. But we really do focus on, when we're thinking about preserving our best remaining wild rivers, we focus on those North Olympic Peninsula streams. So anyway, thank you.
Hey, Nick, thanks. Hey, I'll just say, I appreciate you highlighting the need for sort of this distribution, sort of considering the distribution of fish through time. So the statewide steelhead management plan highlights that as an important consideration. And for everyone on the line here, just to know, the matrix here, all these green boxes represent fisheries that are expected to have encounters on steelhead that's proportioned to the run timing. So there won't be sort of disproportionate effect early or late. I didn't really make that clear earlier, but I appreciate Nick bringing that up. So thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
And next up is Nathan. Nathan, I've allowed you to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much for having the meeting. As always, you guys are doing a lot of thankless work and stuff that's just so important for us right now. I am kind of with everyone else that we should just be closing the season down. We've had multiple years where this has been a hot button issue. We knew that it was coming. We should be closing this down. Being a Forks resident, I will say that I could find a way to compromise and at least have some sort of a hatchery fishery for the rivers that have a hatchery on them, or at least a hatchery stray fishery, add them that we know works well, fish them until the end of December. But that has to go hand in hand with talking about guides in the state, and that they're a commercial entity and that they are kind of augmenting our catch per unit of effort for the recreational average angler. So, we need to talk about that and exactly how that interacts with all these stocks out here, especially the wild component stocks that are not doing well. So, in ending, I'd just like to remind you that, there's a lot of conservation-minded anglers out there that the Olympic Peninsula Guide Association, Grays Harbor Guide Association, and other YouTube personalities that want to comment on this subject. They do not speak for us. We stand with you on the science. Please close it down and let's make it work. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Nathan. Colby, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hi, everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. My name is Colby Olson. I've been fishing the OP for the last 5 years. It's an annual trip in March that I do on my birthday. It's a trip that's near and dear to my heart. The many times that I've gone up there, I've met new people, and it's the community that brings me back and the fish. The OP is a magical place with a unique and fragile ecosystem. I would agree with many others this evening in supporting a full closure. I understand that these closures also include economic consequences, so I intend to keep my dates booked, and I'll probably do whatever harebrained ideas Gray and I can come up with. I do have a few areas of concern. I do understand that full closures do not get rid of pressure, it simply moves it. And so I understand that pressure will go elsewhere within Washington or Oregon. I also have concern about poaching, the estimates of loss, but also the proper enforcement with regards to people and the great area of the OP. But I do feel like utmost that we're kind of wasting our time if we don't know the outcomes of our tribal co-manager agreements. That I do think has a huge, profound effect. But these fish need to come first, not our angling opportunities. I think it's too late for experimental and highly reactive regulations. I support a full closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Colby. Next is Jessica. Jessica, I have allowed you to unmute.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jessica Helsley. I work for the Wild Salmon Center. Over the past few years, I think it's become very evident that there are significant data gaps in our knowledge of coastal steelhead. And until we work to fill those data gaps, including research protocols on active in-season catch monitoring, developing river-specific encounter rates based on best available science, I'm curious how the department can be so confident that any proposed fishery would meet your conservation mandate, especially when the paper fish accounting of the past has, as many people have noted, significant room for improvement. So we definitely support a full closure moving forward until those data gaps are filled. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Sorry, James. Thanks, Jessica. Next is Martin. Martin, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hi, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool. I was just kind of curious if we were going to talk about broodstock programs, like if there was a full closure that went in for maybe even a number of years until we were able to meet goals. Like, are we just gonna, I guess my question is like, in the meantime, are we just kind of waiting and just see if the populations kind of come back on their own? Or I know some broodstock programs have been successful and some haven't. So I was just curious where we were at with that option.
Yeah, appreciate that. And hatchery programs are part of this conversation, not today, but sort of the bigger discussion around fisheries and recovery. Right now, though, today we have products from wild broodstock programs returning to rivers, in the presence of these low wild steelhead populations. And so we're removing wild fish from, the rivers to bring into these hatcheries to supplement these wild broodstock programs now, but not benefiting from the catch. So you're bringing up a good point, rethinking of these hatchery programs to make sure we're producing the best products that are returning to the creels in the places where we have fishing opportunity, I think is a bigger discussion that it'd be nice, Martin, if we could get you in on that. So let's touch base after, because those discussions are happening for sure. Appreciate it.
Thanks, appreciate it.
And next is Nick. Nick, I have enabled you to unmute.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Hi, I'm Nick Tucker. I'm a fishing guide in Forks, Washington. I'm 23 years old, and a lot of things I want to say, but kind of just keep it somewhat simple. So I fish out here 250 days a year about, and I don't see how you guys are exactly getting your numbers. Like, I know it's from spawner surveys, but I fished the upper hoe, the upper bogue shoal, the upper solduck, the upper clawwa. I hardly ever see any red readers or even fish checkers at that. Like, in like, say the bogue shoal and the hoe, if you guys know them, the hoe is all glacier. About 50% of the year on a good year, you can actually fish it. You can actually see 2 feet into the river. I know that because they started their surveys on March 1. I see reds and I catch fish that are spawned out the end of January in all these rivers, like all the Quileute system and the Hoe. And they're starting their surveys on March 1. It's like there could have been 5,000 fish that spawned already, and they don't have those numbers, and then they start checking March 1. Well, I mean, half the time the rivers are blown out, you can't even see, and all these reds get washed away by the time they come and check. I don't get how you guys could use this data and actually feel good about proposing these numbers.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm out here every single day and I see the fish we have and I see how good they're treated. And that's another thing, like Bullock, Ryan was saying it too, like us, I'm not just saying fishing guides, but I mean, older people too, like that have boats and that fish out here, they get young anglers into fishing, and we're teaching them how to release them right, like how to fish for them properly. And this is getting passed down. Like my dad showed me all of this, and how are we going to show it to future generations? How are they even going to want to fish for these fish and know how to protect them if we just keep taking away from our fisheries? When I know we've talked about broodstock and stuff, but we got one of our best broodstock programs, the Snyder Creek program, taken out of the Solduck pretty much when I first started guiding out here. And everything since I started guiding was like, 10 years ago, with a lot of these being broodstock programs that just helped us. Sorry, I can say a lot and I'm kind of rambling, but.
No, Nick, let me jump in here because I don't think you and I have met, but you're bringing up a lot of really good points and perspectives there that I've heard from some, but not very often. So I really appreciate everything you're saying. One thing that might help us down the road that we can't solve today is, kind of better understanding of each other's work through hanging out together. Me and you, but maybe my team would kick me under the table for saying this, but we got a whole bunch of people walking those spawning grounds every 7 days, and it'd be nice if our paths crossed a little more. And so one idea is that you come out or others come out and watch the spawning ground work. And what I'm thinking is, our perspective comes from, 50 or 60 years of this kind of standardized approach at counting fish. And so it may be nice to bring our worlds together a little bit more and talk through this thing. So anyway, I just appreciate everything you're saying there. And
I want to throw one more thing in real quick, like what you're saying about working together and all that. Like, I'm totally for that. And I never understood why us fishing guides, we're on the water every day. It's so hard to communicate with the state, because we could literally you wouldn't even have to pay fish checkers. I mean, we're on the river every day. I see every single red there is from pretty much all the spots where they spawn down. I can tell you how much reds are in, X amount of miles on what stretch of river on any given time. Whereas your fish checkers might go out there one time in a 2-week span, but there was a high water right before they got there and it just blew all those reds out.
Hey, Nick, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the feedback there, Nick.
Appreciate it, Nick. We got to move on. We got about just a little less than a half an hour left and want to make sure we get to as many folks as possible. Leah,
well, thank you guys for the opportunity.
Thanks, Nick.
And next is Luke. Luke, I have enabled you to unmute.
Yeah, this is Luke, first time caller, long time listener. Thanks to the WDFW for everything you're doing with these town halls. I just think it's, really great. And there's been and I basically just have a comment. There's been a lot of talk about a full closure, which I would be completely in support of if I was, confident that it would move the needle for the fish. But I'm pretty skeptical that it would. I think we're not working on the problem, rather trying to treat the symptoms. If there was a full closure, what is going to happen to help the fish out? There's still dams, hatcheries, nets, and things that impact the fish way more than the sport fishing. So I personally think that we should have a partial season, because the wild fish need advocates. And I think if you get rid of fishermen, you're getting rid of a lot of the advocates, and that would be not good either. So anyway, just wanted to bring up that point. What are we doing to if we shut it down for a season, what are we going to do to try to get the fish to rebound? It's really, I feel like we're talking about shutting it down, but not really putting efforts into bringing fish back. So anyway, that is it. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke.
And next we have Brett. Brett, I have enabled you to unmute.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Hey, I'm Brett Gaba. I'm the editor for Steelheaders Journal magazine. Definitely in agreement with a lot of people about closure and there's just the resources not being there. I think my biggest question to you guys, and maybe I could phrase this in the form of a statement so it's more of a comment, but I'm hoping I can get an answer from somebody on the line now. And I feel like I'm hearing a lot of great discussion, a lot of great, solutions to a very complex problem, but we're only getting like half of a plan from the WDFW. And from a co-management standpoint, is it possible for you guys to present together? Because right now it feels like we're hearing half of a plan and then, well, we're not exactly sure what our tribal co-managers are going to do. And I'm not trying to point fingers. I'm just trying to address every single aspect of this complex problem. And if we're going to call for a full closure, what does a full closure mean? A full closure to recreational angling and everything else is on the table? How can anybody on the other side of the phone think that that's going to make any kind of difference and get those graphs reversed and going upwards versus the same? So I just let me know if is this too political and there's no way you could do it? Or is it possible for you guys to present a solution together where you're both actively co-managing? Because you're doing an amazing job engaging us. I just want to hear that the other side of this is just as transparent as you guys are being.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I don't have all the answers that you want, but I will say there's an example of what you're talking about north of Falcon, where we're focused around salmon season setting. In recent years, as conservation concerns have increased, the tribal co-management team, the state and the tribe has had opportunities to share our perspectives together with the angling public. So those are invitations, right? These are sovereign governments. I'm not going to tell them where they should be and what time they should show up. I really respect our tribal co-managers, but an invitation for something like that isn't out of the ballpark. We've done it in the past. In terms of our expectation for our tribal co-managers, if we signal that a full closure is necessary in some of these rivers, that is one way to communicate our perspective on the state of this problem. So that said, we're also not in the dark. We work daily with our tribal co-managers. We've been in meetings for the last month on this issue, mostly around the technical pieces, and now we're moving into the policy piece. And so we're here with you guys, the whole team here, guys and gals, to try to understand socially what type of proposals do we want to move forward with. And if it's a full closure, like you're suggesting there, if that's what we go to the table with, that's one of the tools we have to describe the state of the problem in our perspective. So hope I got at some of it, but we can also talk offline if you have more questions when we have more time.
Yeah, I'd like that.
And thank you, Brett. Next, we have Robert. Robert, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me this time?
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Something about old men and new technology. At any rate, I have more of a concern than anything else. First off, I appreciate everything DFW is doing. I think I've been around a long time. I've worked federal agencies, and you guys are doing I think a pretty darn good job considering what you all have to do with. And I'm certainly glad I'm long since retired and I don't have to make the Solomon's choice that you do. My major concern is I'm an elderly angler, and I have concerns that I know this is not WDFW's intention, but by mandating closures from boats, you're effectively eliminating the opportunity for disabled and elderly anglers to participate in the fishery. And I just wanted to point that out. Brian M. brought that up earlier. I would hope that WDFW would hopefully, if they do decide to continue the boat ban, that they have some sort of exemption system in place to accommodate both disabled and elderly anglers. And really, that's the only point I make. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Robert. And next up is this phone number ending in 126. I have allowed you to unmute. You'll need to unmute on your device.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah. I'd like to make a couple comments and a question if I could. First off, comments, full closures will not help us unless all user groups are on board with it. Secondly, the article that Mr. McMillan stated, that's with Atlantic salmon and not Pacific salmon. And thirdly, my question is, just for folks who don't understand with our abundance forecast and whatnot dating back into the 80s, James, maybe you can give folks some insight into how you decipher, how you get those numbers prior to them clipping fish, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. And I got a lot of screens here, so I'm having trouble seeing your name. So sorry to can't find it here.
This is
but
Patrick Gaffney.
Hey, Patrick, thanks. Yeah, I'll just get at that last one really quick. So I showed a graph. This is just going to be easier if everybody can see it. This graph here, Patrick's talking about total run size. These are just wild fish. These are wild. This is our estimate of wild steelhead abundance. Patrick's right that in the early 80s and prior, we didn't use adipose fin clipping, right, as a marking tool. And so here we're only looking back to the 90s, but we can look at wild steelhead data all the way back to the mid 70s in some rivers. And we have the same tool back then that we have now, and that's scale analysis. So all the way back to the 60s, we've been reading scales and identifying whether fish are hatchery or wild in the same WDFW labs. And up until about 2 years ago, with the same reader, the same person making those estimates. So we have a pretty good handle on whether a fish is a hatchery wild, and we have for a long time. That said, the adipose fin clipping in recent years provides, real-time estimates. So these town halls happening, 2 weeks after the crew hangs up their waders on the spawning grounds, wouldn't have this information in the 70s like we do now. Adipose fin clipping helps, but back then they used dorsal fin height and scales, and so. Good point, Patrick. But I think we're controlling for that challenge in our data here. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Next up, we have Joe. Joe, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hi, can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, this is Joe Griffin Hart. I live in Port Townsend, Washington on the Olympic Peninsula. I've only been steelheading for about 3 years now. I've really haven't touched too many of these magnificent creatures that we all like to go out and pursue. But even in that short amount of time, it's clear to me that these fish need a break. We got to give these guys a chance to do what they do. We know if we leave them alone, they can come back. And so I don't have anything new or original to really say other than I'm just really happy to add my voice to the many other voices tonight that were in support of a full closure. And like Bridgette said earlier, if a full closure is what happens, I'm not going anywhere. I will still be here fighting a good fight for these fish. So that's all I really have to say on this tonight. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Joe. And Brian, I have enabled you to unmute.
Hey there. Hey, my name is Brian, lifelong steelheader. I emailed in after the last presentation and got a response. My question was basically, I'm part of that 60% that says shut it down, and been doing this since I was a little kid. I'm, middle-aged now and done it with my family and all my parents' buddies and my dad's buddies, and ready to shut it down if that's what it needs. But if we're not going to do that, why can't we adopt a system? There's there's talk that we don't know how the pressure is going to shift and migrate if we implement rules on certain days, certain rivers, or continue to change the rules in different ways. If enforcement is a problem here, why can't we treat it more like a permit draw system for camping or floating, or in hunting, the world of hunting, different species, there's only so much carrying capacity that or how much pressure can be handled by hunting. So it's a once in a lifetime type tag, or you accumulate points over the years and you get drawn every few years for that type of thing. The answer I received, I think, in summary, was basically we don't have the resources to manage it in those ways. And I guess I'm just not comfortable with that being the line. And I guess I'd like to talk about that a little bit, or hear a little bit more of a response. Thank you. Appreciate all your effort.
Yeah, I'll take a quick swing at that because I might have responded to you, Brian, but then Kelly might have more to add with the idea. So there's resource issues with a lot of the work we do, and we've identified places like high priority things like sport fish monitoring we need to improve on for those effort shift changes that we keep saying there's a bunch of uncertainty. The tag idea, there's resource issues with how to implement it, but there's also questions about sort of social preference. And so I think about, like, I like to fish for steelhead with my son. And if we both drew different tags, how does that work? Of course, that's not a problem we can't solve, but it would require just resources for us to think tank that with folks on the line today. So it is a good idea. So it's not one we're shaking off. So I don't know, Kelly, anything to add there?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit. And I think I'm right when I say that I don't believe we have the statutory authority to develop tag systems. So if we think in other places where we've got kind of a tag, if you will, where folks have to pay a little extra to play, used to have the Columbia River salmon and steelhead endorsement, which is a legislatively mandated program. We've got the Puget Sound Recreational Enhancement Fund, which is another legislatively mandated kind of sort of tag. So I'll double check, but I don't believe we have the statutory authority. We would need approval from the state legislature to implement something like that. But thank you for the idea.
Thank you, Brian. Next, we have Connor. Connor, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hi, you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, my name's Connor. I've been fishing the OP with a bunch of my friends for the last few years. I'm right there with Nick Tucker that was speaking earlier about being on the rivers. I probably fish a good maybe 7,500 days out of the year, and I see a very lacking management of field operatives out there other than standing at the end of boat ramps. Checking people. I mean, I think I've seen a scale checker once in my life. And it's more of, we see more of a blanketed approach in the angler community more than solutions. And we hear a lot of
Oh, we lost you there, Connor.
It looks like he has dropped off the call. We will go to the next person. Armando, I have allowed you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Armando Nieto. I'm just a private recreational angler. I've been fishing for steelhead for about a dozen years. Grew up in Colorado fishing for trout, moved to the state here in no small part to pursue steelhead as just a pastime. And it really pains me to see how the numbers have gone. And it's obviously not just here on the Olympic Peninsula or on the coast of Washington, but all up and down the Pacific coast. And I think there's a lot of factors to weigh in here. I really appreciate the work that you guys have done. I appreciate you putting together these town halls and acknowledging the limitations on what you're able to compute and calculate based on limited data and obviously limited funds to accumulate better data. I think the drive should always be there to improve what we're able to do in terms of enforcement, creel surveys, more accurate estimates of of head counts and what's coming in and what's going out of the system. And including the things that you've acknowledged, like the lack of any estimates for poaching. I think there's a lot of figures that would help improve our knowledge of what's going on in the fisheries. But that's all kind of fine tuning. And I think the bigger, more ominous thing is just that, you know, the species runs here are in decline. There's a lot of factors at play that are not inside of any one entity's control. Ocean conditions is a huge thing. And I agree with a lot of what's been said tonight. We need to see and hear more, I think, directly from tribal co-managers to understand, you know, how much we can impact things with changes at the WDFW level if things stay status quo with the tribes. But all of this is to say that I would register my support for a closure of the fishery this year. Just, you know, there's just too many things that are at risk right now. And I think with all the uncertainty, it's just far better to err on the side of caution than to keep, as somebody said, kind of drawing from next month's paycheck and hoping that we come out all right in the end. I know that this is a widely impacting thing. I've fished with guides, and I really appreciate the hell out of those guys for what they do and for their knowledge out there. And I don't deny that this is a tremendous impact on their livelihood, but I can't see that continuing to kind of stave off or to maintain the hope that we can kind of squeak by year to year is going to produce any real long-term survivability for these guys, steelhead and fishermen. So that's my vote, is to close it for the year and hope for the best. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Armando. Next, we have Jesse. Jesse, I've allowed you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I really appreciate having these forums. I used to travel to try to be a part of these town halls when they were in different places, and it was always a chore. So I really appreciate just the transparency and all the work that's going into this. It's really wonderful. I've been fishing for steelhead for about 35 years and growing up in Oregon, and I've seen so many rivers and streams that once had incredible runs of wild fish that are completely extinct. So, you know, we're looking at the screen of these rivers, and there are, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of rivers that don't even have steelhead that return to them, that I fished for as a kid, that my dad fished for as a kid, and they're gone. And I think it's also, you know, there's the two sides of this. I really appreciate the discussion, because there's an incredible economic impact to the small towns, the little cities that rely on fisheries. The Santiam Canyon in Oregon, Forks, Port Angeles, bigger cities, they rely on these fisheries to sustain them and the people that live there. And I understand that side of it. The other side of it is that fishing success and skill has gone up so much in the last 20 years, 30 years. We have the guides know where fish are. They know the runs, they know the buckets, even in rivers where the rivers change, like the Hoe. People know exactly when to fish it. They know exactly what CFS to look for. They look for weather systems. They know when to fish it. And people have gotten incredibly effective. The last time I fished the Olympic Peninsula, I saw 15 boats at least put in at minis before 10 a.m. And I packed up my stuff and went home because I couldn't stand to see it. And people have gotten really effective at fishing, and these fish are getting hammered. And I don't know, there are a million things that are impacting these fish, but my vote would be to close the systems and give the fish a break for a year. Thanks.
Thank you, Jesse. I think we'll have time for maybe one or two more. Next is Hal. Hal, I have allowed you to unmute. Hal, are you there? Okay, Hal, you may need to leave and come back. We'll move on to Warren. Warren, I have allowed you to unmute. Warren, are you there? Looks Looks like people might have raised their hands and forgotten about it. Okay, next we have Garrett Moody. Garrett, I've allowed you to unmute. Garrett, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'd like to voice my my position, I guess. I think these wild fish have been hammered on quite a bit. I mean, I've been fishing the Chehalis and a lot of Grace Harbor for I mean, I'm 26 years old. I've been fishing steelhead since I was 7, so 20 years. And I think we need to leave these wild fish alone as much as we can and maybe use up, you know, the impacts that we have. We should prioritize on like some hatchery holes. Take the Skookumchuck, for example, maybe only open it like a mile from the hatchery. And, you know, some of these bigger systems like the Chehalis, I mean, that's my home river, but, you know, there's no real way to get away from the wild fish there. So take that river, for example, we ought to just close that one down for the year. But I guess I would say let's keep our fisheries where we can, mainly target the hatchery fish, even if it's only a couple days a week. And then, you know, close some of this stuff down, you know, by, you know, mid-February, so we can leave a bunch of these the main wild fish populations alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Garrett. And we have Ryan. Ryan, I've allowed you to unmute. Ryan, are you there? Okay, and we have Hal again. Hal, can you unmute? Like not. And after that, we have Wes. Wes, we have allowed you to unmute. Wes, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Poaching impacts, however you would quantify them, would tend to increase the run size reconstructions. So that might be not as big a thing as people are like going on about. We certainly need better monitoring. I'll say I'm for a full closure if you actually got the tribes to also be off the water. Absent that, we'll talk more about how to fashion a season with some diversity in it. But I really want to talk about thinking about closing river systems that don't have hatchery fish in them early in the year, and or carving out a window between hatchery and wild fish. Like, try and get off of the January fish as much as you can. We've always loaded up the impacts in March and April for the wild fish, or, you know, February, March, and April, but we need to maybe move some of the pressure off of the early run and put them maybe a little bit later. Anyway, I'm sure we'll chat more.
Hey, thanks, Wes. I just want to reiterate, you know, I can't get the tribes off the water, right? They manage their own fisheries. So I just want to make sure there's a treaty right there that we're all recognizing. But I think maybe it's a minor sort of, you know, wording thing. And then in terms of poaching, there's a couple ways, you know, we can get at that, you know, unaccounted for harvest, illegal harvest that you're talking about. And we're looking at some math to incorporate them in the modeling, and also working with enforcement to talk more about that. So thanks for flagging it.
So Leah, we've got a couple minutes left. I want to be respectful of people's time, but let's have one more.
Okay.
There's another hand up.
Our last hand is Christian. Christian, I've allowed you to unmute.
Leah, thanks for letting me get another comment in. I just wanted to comment about the options. James, if you guys give us something on the hatchery runs and you do the no fishing from the boat on everything else, say bogey down, saw duck down, Queets, Hartzell down. You know, I guarantee you, you'll get a different response from us. You'll get a lot more open arms. We'll be about it. Like Nick said, I mean, I'm not on there 250 times a year, but I float those systems probably 150 times this year. I'm seeing fish. I'm not seeing fish counters. I'm not seeing surveys. I saw a helicopter. That's why I know about the helicopter. I saw one on the Soul Duck. But if you give us something where we can fish from the boat on these hatchery runs, with the timing of those hatchery runs, I promise you, we'll be happy with something. But yeah, besides that, I'm all about the closure if the tribes are on board, but I don't think that's going to happen. Most of these groups, I think that's why they're pushing the closure. They believe that's going to happen. It's not going to reduce encounters. The fish are going to go down still. So we've got to get on board with changing the way we do our hatcheries. You know, they were talked about the Snyder Creek, the hatchery that had an average of 7% return over 25 years. You guys closed that down. You moved it to the Kalawa, yeah, but you know, from what I understand, it's really struggling with funding and facilities, and you guys really aren't doing anything to help that. So just give us something, man.
Thanks, Christian. We're about done, but as you think about this matrix, Christian, moving forward and we regroup on it, the regulation you just described, bogey down, Kalawa down, Soul Duck down, fish from a boat, that's going to be the one that's third from the right here, fishing from a boat and select water. So it's very similar to what you just said. So thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah.
So James, can you go to your last slide that's got the web address on it? So if you see down here in this bottom right-hand corner of this slide, this is the portal we've been talking about. And again, if we didn't get to your questions tonight or your ideas tonight, please use that portal. Give us your feedback. And just to reiterate what I said earlier, thanks for hanging in there with us today. I mean, I was looking at the numbers. Every once in a while, we had over 170 folks participate tonight, so that's great. It's really good when people care enough about fish to attend these things and to voice your opinions and concerns and suggestions. So thank you very much for that. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be publishing the time and date, the date and time for our final Steelhead Town Hall, Coastal Steelhead Town Hall. Look for that to come out, hopefully, like I said, by the end of the week. We'll probably be looking at the last week or so of November for that town hall. We'll get it out there as soon as we can. Again, thanks for everything, everybody. Hope you have a great night. And again, really appreciate you being here with us tonight. Take care.
Thanks.